Well, Eddie beat me to it this morning, but happy Mother's Day to all you wonderful mothers. We'll talk about y'all here in just a moment. But today, we're going to continue our study of Peter. I was going to hold off a little bit, but I enjoyed last week so much, I was like, you know what? We're just going to keep talking about Peter. He's a good topic. And so just to kind of recap last week, I'm not going to repeat the same things we talked about, but we're going to just kind of recap with a couple other examples. The first one I want you to think about, we're talking about a man who was very immature. We know he was a sinner. He said what was on his mind. That was constant throughout his life. He didn't hesitate. And so the first one I want to mention was in John chapter 13, just a moment that shows kind of his immaturities. John chapter 13, we're going to start in verse 5 and just read through verse 10. Just a few verses here. But starting in verse 5, it says, "After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the apostles' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter saith unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus saith to him, He that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit. And ye are clean, but not all." You see, Peter took that moment and said, "No, don't just wash my feet. If I need to be clean, wash me all, wash everything, clean me." That's Peter. That's a good example of Peter. Mason read this morning about the transfiguration. I chose that verse in particular because it shows his lack of knowledge at one point. You know, he's ready. He sees Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and he's like, you know what? Let me go build 3 tabernacles. And immediately, God pops in and takes the focus. He said, this is my son. He changes that motion that Peter was head fast into. Jesus was the point. And so he learned a lesson there. It just goes to show some of his immaturities. You know, this is my beloved son, whom I'm well pleased. Then we see this development take place. He's learned a lot. Peter accused the Jewish leaders and people of crucifying Jesus. He did this at least 4 times that we know of, that's written of. He did it in Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost when he was talking to the crowd. He did it in Acts chapter 3. This was right after he healed the lame man. He did it in Acts chapter 4, right before the Sanhedrin. And he did it in Acts chapter 5. Peter literally tells the council that has him arrested at this point that they killed him by hanging him on a tree. Peter was about speaking the truth. And he was about that because he was hoping that in telling these people what they had done and showing them the errors in their way, that they would be pricked in the heart the same way they were on the day of Pentecost. Our last lesson that we had focused literally on Peter's immaturity and his growth. And this week, we're going to dig into the book of 1 Peter. It wasn't fair, I don't think, in my opinion, to leave everybody with a very generic synopsis of this incredible writing from somebody who started out like each of us. He started at the bottom. He started as a sinful man and he grew. And so we're going to study some of his lessons. We're not going to leave it off with telling people to be subject to one another. We're not going to leave it off with saying love one another, or just plainly saying he tells us of an incorruptible inheritance. We're going to talk about some of these things. We're going to go into more depth in some of these things because they're good lessons. And it shows his growth and his development and what he's trying to teach each and every one of us. And so if you want, we'll go ahead and turn over to 1 Peter, because that's where it's going to start today. We're going to start in verse 3. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, it starts, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time, wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen ye love, in whom, though now you see him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls." When you read those first nine verses, essentially, you see a living hope. Our hope that we have is not based on worldly circumstance. It's based around the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that faith that we have in him. That belief that he did these things. He died for us. His blood was shed for us. And he will come back for us. Peter later on in his writings tells us that he's going to come back like a thief in the night. And he also tells us in this first section of chapter 1 about the purpose of trials. Suffering is not an accident. Suffering and these trials test the genuineness of our faith. In verse 7, it literally said that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than that of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus. There's a couple times throughout our study today that you're going to see him compare things to gold. At one point he compares it to silver and gold, because those things don't last. He just told us of an incorruptible inheritance. It's not going anywhere. It's being taken care of by the power of God. If you look, well, I would write this down so you can go back to it. John 16, verse 33, Jesus tells us in that scripture, in the world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. He tells us it can be done. He showed us it can be done. And Peter is reflecting on some of the things that he had taught. Some of the things that he had learned from Jesus himself. He was there. He was witness to it. And Jesus told him, you're going to have problems. You're going to have to go through these trials. But be happy. Because I already did it. You can do it too. That's what he's telling us. You can get through these things. If we look a little bit further, this next section, it's called Living as a Holy People. What I'm calling it. And it's interesting. I mentioned last week how everybody says that Paul's relatable. And he is relatable. He made his mistakes. He did wrong for so long, and he turned it around. But Peter's relatable too. He was a sinful man, and he turned it around. He did the right thing. Did he make mistakes along the way? Of course he did. We know he did because he tells us so. He shows us some of the mistakes that he made, his immaturities. Paul writes in 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Believe it or not, Peter tells us something similar right here in the book of 1 Peter. In verses 13 and 14 of chapter 1, it says, "Wherefore gird up your loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end of the grace, hope to the end for that grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust of your ignorance." He's telling you to learn and study. In fact, what's interesting to me in this, I had to read verse 13 a couple of times because I was confused when it was talking about gird up your loins. Gird up your loins. That is something from the Old Testament that it talked about, and I didn't understand it. But they wore, I don't remember what the term was. It's not dress, but essentially it was a dress. It was robe. There you go. We'll go with robe. And when something bad happened and they had to take off in a hurry, you know what they did? They picked up the front and tucked it. They girded up their loin. They'd take off and they'd be able to run and they'd be clear. They wouldn't have anything obstructing their jog. They were able to take off and get out of there. They prepared themselves. They got it ready. That's what he's telling you to do with your minds. Get it ready. Study. Learn. It's an interesting way of putting that. He gives us a visual to think about while we're learning that. So I thought that was interesting. And then he tells us right after, he says to gird up your loins, be sober. Be sober. Later on he'll tell us to be sober because our adversary, the devil, is like a roaring lion. He's going to come after the ones that are not prepared, the ones that are weak. So be sober. Be wise, be sober. And then in verse 14 he says, as obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust of your ignorance. Once you've learned these things that God tells us and teaches us, once you understand these things, he's telling you, don't go back to your former selves. Be obedient. Don't go back to the lust of the flesh. Look forward towards the spiritual. Be the person that he wants you to be. And in those two verses, it kind of reminds me of the same things that Paul taught. It's kind of funny how they have all these things in common. It's almost like the same person taught them. Right? So prepare your minds. The next one, be holy. Be holy. In verse 15, it says, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. Because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. And if ye call on the Father, who without respect of persons judgeth according to every man's work, pass the time of your sojourning here in fear. First off, Jesus set the standard, and we should be imitators of him. Our actions and everything that we do should reflect him and what he's taught us through his word. He also tells us there to be holy. Why? Because we're going to be judged for what we do. And I love the way that he says this. Who without respect of persons judgeth according to every man's work. He doesn't respect the persons. What does that mean? Well, let me explain. He doesn't care if you're rich and famous here on earth. That does not matter to him. It's about what you do. He doesn't care if you're the poorest individual who ever walked the earth. It's about what you do. If you're the richest person in the world but don't live the right life, you're not going to buy your way in. Your money, your fame, your glory, it means nothing if you haven't lived the life. So be holy in all that you do. Be holy in the conversations that you have. Be holy in everything that you do. Imitate Jesus. Do the things that he wants us to do, the things that he's commanded us through the scriptures. mean, it is sometimes for some, but it shouldn't be. It should come naturally after a while, shouldn't it? Luckily, the price has been paid for us. If we read verses 18 and 19, it says, "For as much as ye know that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things, as silver and gold, from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot." We talked about that this morning when I did the scripture reading for the communion. He was brought like a lamb to slaughter, without blemish. He had done nothing wrong. We were the ones that were messing up. We still are to this day. And he died. He died and his blood was shed for us. Again, it's not silver and gold that's going to buy our pardon and get us into heaven. It's that precious blood. It was that sacrifice that he made. There has to be an atonement. There was. He went to that cross and died for us. His blood was shed for us. And when we choose him and we take that death, burial, and resurrection of baptism, we are washed in his blood continuously. He did that for us. So you see, in the first chapter of Peter, he gives us hope. He tells us about an incorruptible inheritance. He tells us how to live. And he tells us who paid the price. All that in one chapter. And I summed it up in 3 short statements earlier. Love one another, subject to one another, incorruptible inheritance. Told you there's a lot more to Peter than just 3 simple terms. And that was just the first chapter. In chapter 2, he tells us to lay aside all evil. In verses 1 through 3, he says, "Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile and hypocrisies and envies and all evil speakings, as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. If so, be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious." It's an interesting statement. We find out often by reading the scriptures and the Gospels that when we go through baptism, we're a new creature. We have a new life. We're reborn. We're like newborn babes. And right here, Peter pretty much says that all over again. He says, as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word. It's an interesting concept when you take that Jesus was going to offer the woman at the well living water. Okay? Living water, spiritual water. Something that was going to keep her from thirsting again. Well, right here, we're hearing of milk of the word. That's food. For a newborn babe, it's food. He's taking in the substance. It's right here. He's giving it to us. We should desire that. And the more we learn, the more we should grow. Spiritually. That's what we're talking about. So he tells us to lay aside all evil. And as newborn babes, take in the word. Learn it. Then he goes on, he talks about the government. He's kind of going to lay out some directives here for us. So if you want to look, verses 13 through 17, it says, "Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. We don't always agree with our leaders, but we pray for our leaders. We want them to do right. There are laws in this land that we are to obey and follow. And we have to do that. And Jesus and God, they want us to do that. The point that stops is when their law contradicts his law. If his law trumps. It trumps all. I'm sorry. We should be following him. And in doing so, sometimes we'll be persecuted. We've seen it in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament earlier on. Peter was told not to continue to preach the word. He continued to preach the word. There are times when we have to go against what we're told on earth to follow him. Jesus is the chosen one. We should be listening to what he tells us and what he commands. So there is a point where that stops, but in the meantime, we should be following. And then, again, I told you all to love one another. I said that last week. Love the brotherhood. Honor all men. We should have respect for one another. Do we always have to agree? No. I'll give you a prime example. A friend of mine, I worked with him for several years at Ken Towery's. He was a good person. He was a good person. Spiritually, I do not agree with him. We had disagreements on where we stood. I was a child of Christ. He was a Baptist. We had good conversations. We really did. He was very smart, but he was misunderstood. He didn't fully get what he was reading and teaching other people. If he did, he would have converted. But we never argued. But neither one of us ever won the battle. I tried to turn him. He tried to turn me. Neither one of us were going to shake. But I loved that person. He was a good guy. He treated me right. We don't have to agree. There's a lot of things in this world we're not going to agree on. But I respected him because he treated me with respect. Think about that. The next one, you can actually apply to your daily life for the most part. Peter tells us about the workplace, believe it or not. You may not think of it that way, but you can apply it that way. It says, we'll continue this here. Servants, in verse 18, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward. For this is thankworthy, if a man for conscience toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it, if, when ye be buffeted for your faults, ye shall take it patiently? But if, when ye do well, and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps. I don't always like work. In fact, very, very rarely do I like work. I love working with new people. That's my job. I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy teaching new people. It's kind of why I enjoy this. I enjoy teaching. I'll enjoy talking, especially about one of the best subjects we will ever talk about. I don't so much enjoy talking about work. But I treat my people with respect. I am good to the people that I work with. I wouldn't ask my people to do anything that I wouldn't do. I try to be that type of leader. And when you look at it that way, He tells servants to be subject to your masters. Employees showing respect for our employees even if treated unfairly. Jesus made this example. He showed the example. Jesus was a servant leader. And he was not treated fairly. You see, he showed us the path. He showed us how to do things. He showed us that we're supposed to work for others. We're supposed to do for others. In the workplace, no, it's not always fun. No, you may not always feel like you're treated the best. But we're paid to do a job. So we go in there and we do that job to the best of our ability. We have respect for our employers. It's pretty interesting when you take a moment to think that he tells us about how we respect the government, have respect for our employers, be a good servant. Jesus was the best servant leader. But now we're going to get around to what I've been waiting for. He even gives us direction in the home. I'm telling you, Peter's smart. He had it going on. And in the home, I want to read a few verses for you first. Let's start in 1 Peter chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 1. In verse 1, he says, "Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. While they behold your chastity conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner in the old time, the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered." I've heard a lot of stories growing up and over the years of wives winning over unbelieving husbands. They do this through pure conduct. There are examples every day of faithful women that continue to be faithful, and their husbands eventually follow. They have guidance from the wife. You see, oftentimes you hear, well, we're just women, we're just this, we're just that. No. You have an important role to play throughout Scripture and throughout our lives today. And that role is oftentimes overlooked. But Peter teaches us about it. I can tell you that I've heard stories of women being driven to church every Sunday to meet with the congregation, and their husbands sit out in vehicles and never come into the building. But all it takes is that one time, that one chance that you ask them to bring you in. That foot steps outside of the car door and comes in with you. It happens. Sometimes it's a persistence of, we're going to service this morning, you coming along? And you hear that week after week, and finally you go along with your grandmother and your mother. It's sometimes that persistence that wins the heart. There's also the knowledge that women have. There's a lot that can be learned from the women in the church. It's been brought to my attention that we had a lesson a few weeks ago about Solomon. And it's a funny lesson because, it's not a funny lesson. It is to me because I understood it. Mom said it could be traumatizing to hear of a king saying, "We'll split the baby in half." Yeah, that can be pretty traumatizing. And I said that it was a creative way for him to choose which mother was the mother. But that's not the point of that story. It's been brought to my attention that he chose the best mother. I didn't think of it that way. I thought he chose the right mom. He didn't just choose the right mom. He chose the best mom. The mom that was willing to give something up. That wanted the best for that child. I'm talking about mom on Mother's Day. Go figure. I've also learned, it was pointed out to me last week when I was talking about the incredible speaking power of an uneducated, untrained Peter, that after he saved the lame man and everybody witnessed this and he was speaking, I mentioned the 5,000 people that believed him afterwards. If you go back and read Acts chapter 4, verse 4, it doesn't say people. It doesn't say crowd. It said 5,000 men. That was pointed out to me Wednesday night by Brenda. There's a lot that can be learned from the women in this congregation if we're willing to listen. Women, you play a huge role in God's church, in Jesus' church. Do not forget that. I'm listening. I'm learning. I hear you. I just wanted to take a moment and make sure that was understood. But I think it's interesting that, like I said, Peter makes a point to talk about government. He makes a point to talk about the workplace. He makes a point to talk about wives. Husbands got to also remember to treat their wives with understanding. I think that's an interesting moment. He says, they are fellow heirs. It's not just the men, it's all of us. So take care of your wife. Take care of women. There's also strength with women. My daughter loves to listen. In fact, she was singing it in the car this morning. There used to be a show on TV called Reba. A single mom that works 2 jobs. I'm going to point this out too. Some women teach us strength. My mom's a survivor. It's strength. We're going to get away from talking about women now, but I had to point all those things out. You ready to continue? We're going to go to chapter 4 now. Look at this. Look at all the stuff that we've studied, and I tried to sum it up in 3 little short statements. There's consolation in suffering. That's the topic that we're going to talk about now for just a moment. In chapter 4, we're going to start verse 12. Verse 12 says, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding joy. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. For the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on his behalf. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begins at us, what shall the end of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinners appear? Wherefore let them that suffer according to